Hello. Well, I don't know about you, but in life, some of the most ordinary things teach me about my relationship with God. So I want today to share with you an anecdote about my satnav in the hope that it will bless you. My satnav is very old. I got it several years ago from my brother who had purchased himself a new one, so it was a hand-me-down. And I was extremely grateful when he gave it to me because I am very geographically challenged. He has since then upgraded his quite a few times and in consequence has offered me several others which are much newer and posher than my one. One I remember was one of the best known brands, but I do kind of like my satnav. It's simple to use. I know exactly how to get it to work. I know that it's ancient, so it takes ages to find satellites, and so on. But I also know that eventually it will get me where I need to go. Well, I never drive if I can get the opportunity to be the passenger. So I've seen and heard lots of much more modern sat navs in action. And they offer a continual stream of advice. Keep right, turn left in 100 yards, turn left in 95 yards, 90 yards, 89 yards. You get the idea. My sat nav does not do that. I am a slightly reluctant Londoner, but I really love Cornwall. However, the extent of my knowledge of the journey there is that I come off the M25 onto the M3 for a while, and then at some point have to go off onto either the A39 or the A339. I'm not really sure which. And then there comes a point when my sat nav will take me one of two ways, which means I either will or will not travel through Truro, which doesn't actually matter. And that is the sum level of facts that I know about the journey to Cornwall. But let's face it, that level of knowledge is never going to be enough to get me to my favourite county in time to tuck into a clotted cream tea before the shops close. I really need my sat nav. Well, I remember a few years back driving down to Cornwall with my sat nav poised to help me. And I hoped it would do what the other sat navs do, namely offer me a constant stream of soothing reassurance that I was on the right path. Well, of course, it didn't. I got precisely one instruction and I followed it and drove. Half an hour went by in silence, so I glanced at the screen, seemed okay. Another half hour went by, so I checked to see if it was still plugged in, and it was. But by now I was wondering, why isn't it saying anything? Am I still on the right road? Have I gone wrong? Did I just not hear an instruction because I was too busy daydreaming? But in the middle of a road with which I wasn't particularly familiar, I didn't seem to have much option other than just to continue to drive. Well, eventually I got really quite worried, even to the point where I wouldn't have minded it saying recalculating in that slightly smug tone it uses sometimes. At least that would have shown me that I was not alone and completely unguided on my journey. Sometime later, still nothing, and then a thought occurs to me that makes my blood run cold. What if it's broken? Please, Lord, don't let it be broken. Even more time went by and I still had this ear-shattering silence from my sat-nav, and I began to feel really panicky. Now, some people I realise hearing this might think I'm exaggerating and that this kind of thing is an adventure. Well, those are people like my brother who have some sense of direction and probably on that basis don't really need a sat-nav anyway, because they're generally fairly sure that they'll eventually work out where they are. Well, congratulations if that's you, because it certainly isn't me. I can go down the same road 10 times and to me it will look different each time. Equally, I can go down 10 different roads and they all look the same. So for me, this kind of a situation is not an adventure. It's a reason to panic. Back to the journey to Cornwall though. After about an hour and a half, I really was getting more and more worked up. But then, suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere, in 500 yards, exit left. And the relief was immense. My satnav was alive. I wasn't lost. I'd come through to the next part of my journey, and my satnav would guide me afresh. Well, I learned a few things from that experience which kind of mirror how we experience our Christian journey sometimes, I think. Firstly, it occurred to me just how much that previous hour and a half had tested my nerve. I really needed to be able to trust my sat nav because it was the only thing stopping me getting lost. And initially, that trust was easy enough because it had just recently spoken to me, but then it went quiet, and I had to carry on driving on the strength of that initial instruction only. And the further I drove, and the more time that elapsed since the initial instruction, the further away from me my guide on my journey seemed. It was almost as if it was still back in Surrey while I was approaching Somerset. But that was a subjective assessment based on my emotions, because the objective reality was it was on the passenger seat all the time. And the same is true for us spiritually. Our emotions are not a reliable gauge of the presence of God in our lives. Just as my sat nav was in the car all the time when I had a very powerful sense of being far removed from its help and direction, God is with us always, whether we feel close to Him or far away, whether we feel burdened by a sense of our sin or whether we're rejoicing in our salvation. It makes no difference to where He is, because He is there. And secondly, my sat nav was not only in the car with me the whole time, it was working the whole time. It didn't go to sleep / break and luckily wake up / mend itself just in time to get me onto whichever one of the A39 or 339 is in fact the correct road. It knew all the time where I was and told me to exit left in plenty of time for me to do it. And similarly, God isn't just with us, He's actively with us, like my sat nav was, knowing where I was, even when it wasn't speaking, ready to speak when needed, ready to protect me from going wrong. And thirdly, that awful silence that I experienced was in fact needful because it focused me and concerned me enough to make me listen hard and consistently. And then when the sat nav spoke, I heard it because by then I was so desperate for it to speak, I would have heard it whisper. But in contrast, noises that are constant and repetitious, I eventually start to ignore. An example is my car, which gives a long beep when I turn the engine off and open the door. Every time. And that's to remind me to turn my lights off. But it's become white noise to me now, and so has no impact whatsoever on me remembering to turn them off. My AA call-outs for a flat battery sadly would bear me out on that. And similarly, the sense of experiencing that silence from heaven that we get sometimes is really hard for us. But maybe it too serves a purpose, honing our listening skills, feeding our hunger to hear the voice of God. It can be frustrating and even discouraging when we ask God to speak and when we hear nothing. But on those occasions, we need to keep obeying Him and to obey what He said when we know He last spoke to us. Because going with the sat-nav analogy again, if I had lost my nerve and decided the sat-nav was broken or had forgotten about me or whatever, if I'd come off the road and taken the decision to try and find the way myself, I would definitely have been lost within less than 3 minutes. But holding my nerve, trusting, was really, really hard. And on that journey to Cornwall, this is what trust looked like. Scared though I was that I might be lost, I kept driving in the direction that my sat-nav initially told me to go, and I didn't deviate, even when it didn't speak to me for over an hour and a half. And I think that in our walk with God, trust often looks much the same. There, in all likelihood, will be times when we feel unsure or even afraid. But part of trust is remembering that our emotions are not reliable guides, and therefore we shouldn't allow them to be the basis of the decisions that we make. I probably should get a new satnav. As I said, mine's old. So old, in fact, its charger is one of those bigger USB fitting ones that you can't actually get anymore. I can't unplug it because the aperture is slightly warped, and therefore if I got it out I wouldn't be able to get it back in again. And also, as we've established, it doesn't talk to me as much as I would like. But will I get a new one? No, of course not, because I've proved the one I have. It's true that there are newer, fancier, better ones, but I won't get a new one because I know the one I have ultimately will get me where I need to go. And I don't know that about the others. But I'm not naive. I know that whilst I will put it off as long as possible, eventually my beloved satnav will break and I will have to replace it. And that is where the analogy has to come to an end, because the satnav may provide me with a certain level of security for a very transient journey. But the security that Jesus offers all of us is complete and eternal. And that is something, as we go into this day, we can really celebrate. So have a fantastic day and God bless you. Bye.